Well, Matthew 15 verses 21 to 39 that we just had read to us, it splits into two quite contrasting sections. In the first portion, up to verse 28, we see Jesus' concern for one specific individual. In the second portion, we see his concern for thousands of people. Now, our focus this morning will be mostly on the first portion, up to verse 28. That will be where our focus is mostly. So let's just set the scene. Where are we? Well, at the point in time where our passage begins, Jesus is at a place called Gennesaret. That's close by to Capernaum. It's on the northwest coast of Lake Galilee. And we are told, then Jesus went thence and departed into the coasts of Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon were the principal cities of Phoenicia, and they were ports on the Mediterranean Sea. So Tyre and Sidon may then just be a synonym for Phoenicia. And then the coasts also may simply mean the area around Phoenicia. And so it's actually possible that he only went as far as the borders of that country. And those that say that was the case, that he only went near to Phoenicia, they refer to his command to his apostles not to go in the way of the Gentiles when he sent them out to preach. But I have to say, well, that's a fair assessment, but I'm inclined to agree with those who say that he did in fact go into Phoenicia, to the area around Tyre and Sidon. And I say that on the basis that the whole account revolves around a woman that is referred to in Mark as a Syrophoenician. And when we recognise that meeting her was the only thing that really occurred in that account, then I would have to say that this is clearly another picture of the gospel being for all nations. So Phoenicia then is modern-day Lebanon. Tyre is about 30 miles northeast of Capernaum, and Sidon is just a few miles further north of that. Now, that's 30 miles in a straight line, but there are mountains in an area that would need to be negotiated, so it would have been a longer hike around to get to that place. And then we're told that a woman hears that he's around and she seeks him out. Now, as I just said, nothing else happened on this trip, and after he'd finished with her, he went back to Galilee. It is therefore an unavoidable conclusion that he went there with the express purpose of meeting this woman. Now, I grant that the account says and indicates that the woman searched him out. But any Christian will tell you that after they were converted, they could look back along the path of their lives and see that Jesus had sought them out before they had called on him for salvation. That's what it's like. He's seeking us before we seek him. Anyway, Matthew just refers to her as a woman of Canaan. Like I say, woman. Mark says that she was a woman that was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by nation. To say that she was a Greek was just a common way of the time to say that she was a Gentile. So she was not Jewish. That's the point. As to being a Syrophoenician, that was either what Phoenicians were called at the time, or she was half and half. But Matthew, he just lays it on the line. She was a Canaanite. If you recall, the promised land of Israel was formerly called Canaan. And the promised land certainly included and extended further up north than Tyre. And that area was given and allocated to the tribe of Asher. So not only was this woman a Gentile, she was a descendant of a race of people that God had told the Israelites to exterminate. And their failure to obey God in that task led to them having an untold number of problems. You can say that, therefore, there could hardly be a clearer picture of God showing his love to those who are his enemies. Remember what the Apostle Paul said in Romans 5 verse 10? He said, when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of his Son. And that, of course, is true for all. All humans are God's enemies. But this woman of Canaan shows this truth all the more clearly. I wonder if you think about how you were saved, being God's enemy. How come you were saved if you were God's enemy? And if you are not converted today, I wonder if you think about yourself as God's enemy. I don't expect you do. What, me? Is probably more likely to be what you think. We have been so conditioned to think that if God even exists, his job is to be nice to us and give us what we want. The idea that we may have actually offended God, so much so that we are now at war with him, rarely, if ever, enters our minds. And it is probably for that reason that so many now go for the non-existence option. Because that rather quaint view of God being there simply to fulfill my needs and desires, that view of God and the real world simply don't tie up. But the Bible tells us very clearly that the reason the world is in such a mess is because God is not happy with us. And that's also why we feel that alienation from him. Because we are in a state of rebellion against him. And to make matters worse, we are quite content with that state of affairs. That God should demand we be morally upright and perfect is detestable to us. We want to live as we see fit, not how we are told that we should live. And of course that wouldn't be so bad if it was just some other person telling us their ideas. But God is our creator. He has every right to tell us how we should live. But we will not listen. And so we are, by nature, God's enemies. And us, as such, we won't, in fact we can't, do anything about it. Not of ourselves, anyway. And that is why Jesus, elsewhere, he said he'd come to seek and to save the lost. Like I said, this trip to the coasts of Tyre and Sidon really strongly illustrate that very fact. Now then, something about this woman of Canaan is that she had a little knowledge. She had heard of Jesus, clearly. She'd heard enough to know that Jesus was the Jewish promised one, that he was the Messiah. We see that from her use of the title Son of David. It's a messianic title. And the thing that was weighing her down at that time was the state of her daughter. She says, "My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil." The daughter is in a very distressed condition. The mother could tell that the daughter wasn't ill, and she must have had good reason to say that her daughter was sorely oppressed by a demon. And that sort of thing perhaps catches us off guard. as it were, because demonic activity is not anywhere near as prevalent now as it was when Jesus walked the earth. And because of that, people readily dismiss that kind of thing. And the skeptic just says, well, people didn't know any better in the past, so they just blame things on demons. But that simply presupposes that there are no such thing as demons. But and I think I've told you this before, but the Bible actually gives us every indication as to why demon activity has tailed off since Jesus' time. Consider Mark chapter 3, where Jesus is being accused of casting out demons by the prince of demons. And there, in verse 27 of Mark 3, Jesus says, "No man can enter into a strong man's house and spoil his good, except he will first bind the strong man, and then he will spoil his house." In the book of Revelation, in chapter 20 of that book, Satan is said to be bound for 1,000 years. And we can see, if you read the book carefully, you'll see that the 1,000 years simply represents the gospel age, the age in which we are now living. And my point in telling you this is that there really is no good reason for disbelieving that this poor woman's daughter was tormented by a demon. No reason for not believing that just because that sort of thing doesn't happen on our doorstep today. Now, we also have in this account something that we might not expect, but something that is very important for us to know. And I would say that's perhaps especially important for today's generation. Because today, people want pretty much instant gratification. That is to say, I want it now. Like I was just saying, there is a pretty prevalent perception that God only exists to answer our needs. But here, Jesus demonstrates that even though he has gone all the way to the region of Tyre and Sidon just for this woman, she must learn that things will not simply fall into her lap. And for those of us that are Christians, there is something for us here to learn. We must learn that even if God is determined to give us something, we may still have to wait patiently for it. This woman, she pictures the kind of persistence that we must exercise in prayer. It's pretty evident that she did not give up when she got no reply. It seems that she was at it again and again. And you can see from what the disciples say that she was not giving up. We read in verse 23, and his disciples came and besought him, saying, "Send her away, for she crieth after us." You can tell from their words that they were exasperated with her. Now, of course, you might think that Jesus was being a bit off, not answering her at all. But we only think like that because we have such an upside-down view of things. And that is the very issue that Jesus is addressing here. He does not exist to serve us. We exist to serve him. But after a lengthy silence, then he does answer. But he answers in such a way as to tell her that she doesn't deserve what she asks for. First of all, he says to his disciples, "I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel." Then he says directly to the woman, "It is not meet to take the children's meat and to cast it to dogs." And make no mistake, that is a very strong statement. We might even say it was a harsh statement. But it's not untrue. All of the promises given to the Jews about the Messiah were given to them, to the descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. And of course that simply adds impact to showing just how ungrateful those descendants of Abraham, Isaac and Jacob were in rejecting him. But all those promises, they were given first to the Jews. So he wasn't being untrue in what he said to her. However, keeping our eyes on that woman, by implying that she is nothing more than a dog, he is saying that she is unworthy of being a partaker of his grace. Now I say again that this whole account shows us that Jesus went to that place specifically for that woman. So we cannot even think of laying any malice at the feet of Jesus when he makes that remark. But he evidently intends for her to understand that she has no right or claim on him for mercy, the mercy which she craves. And that, of course, is very important for us all to realise. We cannot demand anything of Jesus on the basis of who or what we are. Mercy, by its very nature, is gratuitous. And the reason that we all need mercy is because of what I said earlier about us being God's enemies. Now, if you think something along the lines of, well, I don't need Jesus to stand up for me, I can fight my own battles, well, you can only think like that if you have a very small view of God. It is not a battle that you can possibly win. As I said before, though, one of the reasons you can't win is because you don't want to. You've got no emphasis, no spur on you to win this battle because you don't want to. But then, of course, there's the small matter of God being infinitely more powerful than you. Now, you can't win this battle. And so if you are to escape the final judgment of God against your rebellion, or sin as the Bible puts it, someone needs to stand in your place. And Jesus is the only one that can do that successfully. He can do that because he's a man and therefore can take the punishment that is due to man. But he's also God, so he has the power to withstand that overwhelming strength of that punishment. And of course that is most graphically portrayed in his death and resurrection. You know, he died on a Roman cross. The Romans had killed plenty of others by crucifixion, so that showed in some way that Jesus was just dying an ordinary person's death. But he did what no ordinary person could do. On the third day after being crucified, he rose triumphant from the grave. And over the space of the next 40 days, he was seen by very many people, over 500 people, in fact, showing that this is not a made-up story. We didn't make that up. Now, if we want to receive the benefits of what Jesus did, dying for our sins and being raised again for our justification, as the Apostle Paul put it in Romans 4, if we want that, then we need to be joined to him somehow. And the Bible tells us we must be joined to him by faith. That's how we are joined to Jesus, by faith. As it's written in Ephesians 2, verse 8, "For by grace are you saved through faith." And this Canaanitish woman displays that in dollops, we might say. She not only did not give up when she received no reply, she even continued when she received a less than encouraging response. When Jesus said it's not meat, that means it's not good or right. It's not right to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. She doesn't go away. She replies, "Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table." So she first of all acknowledges the truth of what Jesus says. But she then picks up the picture and says that even dogs get some crumbs, and that's all that she desires. We have seen from her use of the title Son of David that she knows that Jesus is the Jewish Messiah. She's not asking for anything to be taken away from them, but she appreciates that there's plenty to go round. She may even have been aware of those other occasions when the Lord showed mercy to Gentiles in times past, the likes of Ruth and Rahab, for example. Maybe she knew of them. And so she displays true faith by her persistence in believing that Jesus is her only hope, even in the face of much difficulty. She sees that he is still her only hope. She has also shown the reality of her faith in her humble attitude. If we understand and exercise the faith we are called to, if we exercise it properly, we will be humbled. That will be a natural outworking. If we do not have genuine humility, then it's highly unlikely that we have true faith either. Because when we have true faith in Jesus, we are in effect holding out empty hands. We are saying, to all intents and purposes, that we recognise our rebellion against God, we understand that there's nothing we can do about it, and we wholeheartedly rely on Jesus as the Lord of our lives to save us from our just condemnation. And of course that can only humble us. If it doesn't, then we can't really have grasped the situation. There's a famous hymn you sing here, Rock of Ages, and in one of the verses it says, "Nothing in my hand I bring, simply to the cross I cling." Now, Augustus Toplady, who wrote that hymn, he there captures the heart of the matter. Nothing in my hand, simply to thy cross I cling. Well, so this section in Matthew ends in verse 28. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith, be it unto thee, even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. Jesus acknowledges her faith and gives her that which she came for, the deliverance of her daughter from demon oppression. And you, just as really, can be set free from the bondage that is keeping you apart from God, who is, after all, the fountain of all good. You can be set free by believing the gospel. Turn your back on the old way of life and turn to Jesus. This woman, in this account, she had a little bit of knowledge about Jesus. But with that little bit of knowledge, she sought him out. If anyone is listening to this who thinks they have no knowledge, well, you certainly do now. You at least have what I've told you this morning, and you should build on that and seek Jesus while you can. And for you believers who have believed on Jesus for many years, learn from this woman that there is no room for pride in your life. Do not begin to think that you deserve the good things that you have received. You have what you have because of the mercy of God, nothing more. And in your prayer life, do not be quick to cease from prayer just because you have to wait long for that which you ask. Well, that then is the trip to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And then, having dealt with this one woman, Jesus returns to the Sea of Galilee. And I expect you're thinking that I haven't left much time for the second portion of the passage we read together. And I haven't, because that's mainly because it wasn't all that long ago that we looked at the feeding of the 5,000. And many of the lessons here are the same as they were on that occasion. But I want us to consider it primarily in the light of and in contrast to the first section. We will pick out a couple of other things as well. But verse 38 tells us, "And they that did eat were 4,000 men, beside women and children." Now previously, as we've just seen, Jesus went out of his way for the sake of one person. Now, he says, "I have compassion on the multitude." That's what it says in verse 32. This, of course, reminds us that Jesus is not niggardly. Again, it is Paul in Romans that tells us, "By the obedience of one shall many be made righteous." Romans 5:19. Jesus came to save many. No one need fear that they have missed the boat, as it were. We call Jesus our federal head. And when we say that, we mean that very point, that he stands in the place of many. His death and shed blood covered the sins of a vast multitude of people. But as the Canaanite woman shows us, that doesn't mean that we are lost in some massive conglomerate of faceless people. No, Jesus most evidently is concerned for us all individually. It is sometimes easy to lose sight of that when we think of Jesus standing in for many. I think that is why these two events are linked so closely together, so that we don't get a lopsided view of the extent of Jesus' love for all people, but also of his love for us in particular. But then the other thing to note is what is different here in the feeding of the 4,000 to the feeding of the 5,000. On this occasion, when Jesus says he wants to feed the people, the disciples say basically what they'd said before: "Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness as to fill so great a multitude?" That was more or less what they'd said with the 5,000. And of course, that shows us how slow we can be to appreciate what Jesus has done for us. We're prone to forget things that he has already done. And of course that is a failing that's common to mankind. And that is why the Bible is full of the word remember. Remember. But the differences are, first of all, here, at this event, there are fewer people. Based on the number of men, there are 20% fewer than there were on the first occasion. Then, so there's fewer people, but there's more bread. More bread. 7 loaves compared to 5 in the feeding of the 5,000. And there's probably more fishes as well. We know with the feeding of the 5,000 there were just 2 fishes. Here we're told there were a few. Now that might only be 2, but the Greek means a small amount, so it's probably a few more than 2. So more food for less people. But there is less leftovers. There was more food, less people, but more leftovers. Only 7 baskets compared to 12 baskets before. Now they were a different type of basket, but the difference was to do with their use and not necessarily their size. So what do these differences teach us then? Well, at the very least, they teach us that Jesus' works were not formulaic. They were very personal. We, in our turn, must not think that we can deal with others on the basis of some formula or other. On these occasions, Jesus provided an abundance. On both occasions, there was an abundance, well beyond the basic need. And I find that very comforting. It indicates, as we've said, that though Jesus saves all people, he cares for the individual, that they should have an abundance. But I say, beyond that, he takes a genuinely personal interest in us. He well knows the depth and breadth of our sin. He's thoroughly acquainted with us, and he deals with us as we personally need, and abundantly beyond that. This, then, is our Jesus. Is it any wonder that we love him so much? So then, as we end, let us express that love as we sing our last hymn. Let us love and sing and wonder.